All right, so what we're doing today is we're actually picking up where we left off in class on Tuesday. So depending, because I kind of finished a little bit in slightly different places in each of the three classes, so it might be a little bit of a repeat for some of you. But we were talking about, does imperialist rule cause the growth of nationalism? And in class, we had talked about the Armed Star Massacre, and then we had talked about how the response to that was that Gandhi started the non-cooperation movement in 1920. So that takes us, we were on this question, how did the British respond to nationalistic movements? And then we were in the middle, like I said, of talking about Gandhi and the steps that Gandhi had taken. So he had said in June of 1920, Gandhi had started the non-cooperation movement, and that was against three issues. It was protesting against the Armed Star Massacre, against the harsh peace treaty that Britain had imposed on the Ottomans, and the injustices of colonial rule. It called for a boycott of foreign goods and the promotion of homespun. So that's why you always see Gandhi dressed in these very simple traditional clothing. So Gandhi received a very large following from the rural regions, and the peasants began to organize against the oppressive landlords who were mistreating the peasants, and the fact that they had to pay such high rent. As far as middle-class people, they began to leave schools and they resigned from jobs in protest. Even Muslim Indians began to support this movement. And in September of 1920, Gandhi convinced the INC also to join in the movement. And as a result of that, membership in the INC grew by the tens of thousands. In February of 1922, hold on one second. In February of 1922, I don't know if my pens are going to be working today. My pen's not working today, so this is not going to make it easy for me to write things, but I'll have to spell things for you, so you have to bear with me. In February of 1922, the peasants of Chauri Chaura, Chauri, they began to protest the British unfair economic policies. The police fired on the crowd and arrested protesters, and the peasants responded by lighting the police station on fire and killing 22 police. Public opinion really then kind of turned against this non-cooperation movement because of the violence that was breaking off, and Gandhi's going to call off the movement. He was actually arrested and sentenced to 6 years in prison. Now, the Great Depression hit India pretty hard because the prices of Indian cash crops dropped, in some cases as much as 50%, but the British still were demanding the same amount of taxes that they always had. The factory owners were making their workers work longer weeks for lower wages to make up for their losses. So the response to this was strikes and no rent campaigns and boycotts of British goods. And the British began to fear the violence and the terrorism that was really beginning to grow. Gandhi is released from prison. After 6 years of being in prison, Gandhi's released from prison, and he approached the Viceroy of India with 11 demands. And most of those demands were the release of certain political prisoners and the reduction in taxes. And that was not getting through to the British chose not to respond. Hold on one second. Trash. Stop. Sorry, my puppy is chewing everything. So basically, Gandhi starts a new mass campaign to engage in nonviolent demonstrations and peacefully break laws. And one of the things he began to protest was the salt tax. So in India, it was illegal for Indians to gather and sell salt. And the British basically taxed it. It made salt much more expensive, and it prevented people from being able to make money off of their selling and making their own salt. So he began to protest the salt tax. Gandhi thought that this would really be an issue that would work to unite the people. So on March 12, 1930, he started what's known as the Salt March. And this was a 240-mile march to the sea. So he marches to the sea, and as he goes, he gathers up more and more protesters as he goes. And what he's going to do is, by the time he gets to the sea, he has about tens of thousands of protesters following him. And he goes to the sea, and he makes his own salt. And then he encourages other people to begin to make their own salt. Gandhi, again, is arrested and thrown in jail on April 6, 1930. The participation in these salt protests were really strong amongst women and business owners. But Muslim participation was kind of low, so we're still seeing that there's a difficulty in gaining Muslim support for these movements. Basically, the British responded to this, though, with mass arrests and a lot of police brutality and the beating of peaceful protesters. So, as a result, on March 1931, Gandhi's going to call off the civil disobedience, and the British are going to release a majority of the political prisoners and remove the salt tax. And some radicals in the INC felt that Gandhi was actually being too moderate in some of his ideas that he was coming up with. And the INC and the Muslim League were kind of arguing over what they should do for India, what the future of India should be. So in 1935, the British government passes something called the Government of India Act. And what the British wanted to do with the Government of India Act was to appease some of the people while still maintaining control over India. Basically, the British would maintain control over the central government in areas like defense, railroad, and finances, but in the provinces, it would be governed by Indian representatives. There would be British governors who could override the legislatures, but what it did is it expanded the electorate, the Indian electorate, from 1% of the population to 10% of the population. In 1937, the INC actually wins a majority of the seats in the elections. And this kind of showed an issue with the Muslim League, because the Muslim League had kind of less than 5% of the Muslim vote. And so a lot of Muslims in India chose to vote for regional parties and focused a lot on local issues. The Muslim League supported a law that allowed Muslims to live under Islamic laws. And when they took that on, by 1939, about 3 million more people had joined the Muslim League. So now, into World War II, we're going to see that these various different nationalistic groups in India are going to choose to function and act in a different way. So, like I was saying, in World War II, again, the Muslim League supported the war, like some people did in the beginnings of World War I. However, the INC said, we will only support the war on 2 conditions. Those 2 conditions being that Indians must be included in the central government and they must get their independence after the war. The British refused. All INC members in the government resigned. And the British passed the Defense of India Ordinance in order to limit the power of political parties. Jinnah, who was the leader of the Muslim League, saw an opportunity for the Muslim League to gain greater influence with Britain, and in 1940 issued something called the Lahore Resolution. So Lahore is spelled Lahore. Lahore is a city in what today is Pakistan. And in the Lahore Resolution, it said Muslims must be recognized as a nation deserving their own homelands, and the majority provinces would be independent. It wasn't really clear how this was going to happen, but this is what they were demanding in the Lahore Resolution. By December of 1941, Japan was making a ton of victories, and refugees were bringing stories of some of the Japanese brutality and how the British were not really protecting the people in places like Burma, which is a British colony. So in Bengal, this got so bad, the British actually destroyed all forms of communication in order to prevent, sorry, I lost my spot. What was I saying? To prevent stories kind of reaching the other parts. So by mid-1942, the Indians really believed that British rule would collapse if the Japanese invaded. They were really fearful that the British were not going to be able to do anything to protect them from Japan. So Churchill sends a man by the name of Stafford Cripps, Cripps, and a delegation of British politicians to gain cooperation of the British leaders. This becomes known as the Cripps Mission. And so the Cripps Commission promised self-determination at the end of the war, but they had to pledge to protect the British wartime interests, and both parties, the Muslim League and the INC, rejected it. In August 8th of 1942, we have the beginnings of what's known as the Quit India movement. And there were strikes, there was the destruction of communication networks, destruction of salt manufacturing plants, and there was talk of establishing a government separate from the British. The British responded by arresting all of the INC leaders, and the movement then was led by more of the lower level leaders of the INC and the public. And we see one of the largest movements since the Sepoy Rebellion. In Bengal, there was destruction of government buildings, of police stations, of telegraph lines, of railroads. And by spring of 1943, the British really were using the army to suppress the movement. So about 100,000 people were arrested and about 1,000 people were killed. So we start to see this kind of really strong opposition movement begin to grow. Amongst the Muslim League, we start to see the growth of what's referred to as a Pakistan movement, where they wanted the same rights of Hindus and they didn't want a government that would be run by the INC. In the summer of 1945, we have something called the Simla Conference, SIMLA. And this was the Viceroy of India, which was a British official, the leadership of the INC, in addition, the leadership of the Muslim League. And they were going to create an interim government run by an almost all-Indian executive council. The Congress agreed, but the Muslim League did not. So in February of 1946, there was a revolt in the Indian British Navy, and there was a hunger strike. The British then sent a cabinet mission to begin to negotiate a British withdrawal because they realized that it was not becoming possible for them to control India anymore. So they met with the INC and the Muslim League between March to May of 1946. The Muslim League at this point was really demanding a Pakistan. They wanted a self-governing, independent state of a Muslim majority in the northwest and the northeast, whereas the Congress was demanding a united India. So the compromise was that there would be provinces that would be divided up, each with its own separate government. This would keep India united. It would give Muslim League control in the Muslim majority areas, but both parties rejected the idea. Jinnah then began to call for the Muslims to take to the streets. And in August 16th of 1947, on the day of, it was called the Direct Action Day, there was a mass rally. In Bengal, the Muslim League gave the police and the military the day off, and essentially there was no way to stop the violence. 4,000 Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs died in about 4 days of fighting. It was known as the Great Calcutta Killings. The violence then spread to other areas of Bengal, and about 5,000 people were killed, mostly Hindu. Between October to November, the violence spread west. Entire Muslim villages were being destroyed between Hindu-Muslim violence. So on February 20th, 1947, the Prime Minister of England, his name was Clement Attlee, Attlee, announced that the British would leave India by June of 1948. They wanted a united India. They wanted them to be an ally in the Cold War. They felt that if India was multiple provinces that were independent, the USSR could exert more influence. But the INC and the Muslim League knew that they could never agree on a constitution for a united India. And so the British allowed some Muslim provinces to form a separate country, which is going to become known as Pakistan. So here by 1947, we see that India has finally succeeded in its long fight to gain independence. So despite the fact that they finally gained their independence, we see there are still some pretty large problems brewing with the issue of Pakistan and how is India actually going to be partitioned, and that we're going to talk about later in the week. So see you guys in class. Have a good day.